The Voxcaster died 3 days ago, or maybe it was 3 weeks. Time loses its edges when you're alone in the dark with nothing but the hum of failing generators and the drip of condensation from rusted pipes overhead. I say I'm the last man, but that's not entirely accurate. There are others here technically. Corporal Venn is slumped against the command console, his head tilted at an angle that would be uncomfortable if he was still breathing. Private Mattis is in the supply room, or most of him is. The rest is scattered across the walls in patterns I've stopped trying to interpret. Lieutenant Harrow is somewhere in the lower levels, I think, though I haven't been down there since I heard him screaming, and that was before the Vox died, so probably weeks now. So yes, there are others, but I'm the last one who still walks, still thinks, still remembers what it was like before the bunker became a tomb. My name is Trevin Koss, enlisted guardsman, 3rd Company, Hammerfall Regiment, assigned to Forward Observation Post Epsilon 77 on a world whose name I was never important enough to learn. We called it the Red Place because everything here is red. The sky, the dirt, the rocks, even the water when you could find it, though drinking it gave you cramps that felt like rusty wire coiling through your intestines. The red came from the dust, they said. Mineral deposits kicked up by centuries of bombardment, though I sometimes wondered if it was just blood, old blood, soaked so deep into the planet that the world itself had become a scab. We were here to watch the northern approaches, to monitor enemy movement and relay coordinates to the artillery batteries dug in 60 kilometers south. Simple work. Boring work. The kind of assignment you got when command didn't trust you with anything important, but couldn't justify wasting a bolt round on your execution. I've been in this bunker for 4 months. I know this because I've been marking the days on the wall beside. My bunk, scratching lines into the rockcrete with a broken knife, though I've missed some days, I'm certain, days when I slept too long or forgot, or simply couldn't summon the will to care. The marks go up to 119, but I think the real number is higher. I think time has been slipping past me like water through fingers, pooling in places I can't see, and when I try to account for it, I find gaps, empty spaces where hours or days should be but aren't. This troubles me. This troubles me more than the corpses or the failing power or the sounds that come from the ventilation shafts late at night. Sounds like breathing, but not quite. Like something approximating breath without understanding what breath is for. The bunker was built into the side of a ridge, dug deep into the red stone, a structure designed to withstand orbital bombardment and emerge intact to continue its function. 3 levels, command and quarters on top, storage and medical in the middle, engineering and life support at the bottom. 37 men and women when we first arrived, though that number dwindled as transfers came through, as people rotated out or were reassigned or simply disappeared during night watches and were never mentioned again. By the time the Vox died, there were 12 of us. Now there's me, just me. And I think about that sometimes, about how I'm the one who survived, and I can't find any reason why that should be true. I wasn't the strongest or the smartest or the most faithful. I was just another body in a uniform, filling space, following orders because the alternative was a flogging or worse. But here I am, walking these corridors, breathing this stale air, listening to the generators cough and wheeze like dying animals, and everyone else is gone. The first death was Trooper Kellis, and that one made sense. She was cleaning her Lazarifal, and it discharged, and the beam took off the top of her skull in a spray of light and bone and brain matter that painted. The ceiling of the barracks. Accidental. Tragic. We burned her in the incinerator, said the words Lieutenant Harrow insisted we say. In the Emperor's name, we commend this servant to his eternal watch, and went back to our duties. The second was Sergeant Dren, who hanged himself in the supply closet using wire from the Vox system, That one made less sense, but not so little that we questioned it. Dren had been muttering for weeks, talking about voices in the walls, about how the Emperor had abandoned us, about how the red dust was alive and crawling into our lungs to lay eggs. Madness. We'd all seen it before. The isolation gets to some people, twists them up inside until they can't see straight. We cut him down, burned him, said the words. The third was Private Yusin, who simply stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped moving, just sat in his bunk staring at the wall until his body gave out. Starvation, dehydration. The medic, Corporal Tegan, still alive then, said there was nothing physically wrong with him, that his body had just decided to stop, like a machine that forgets its function. We burned him too, said the words, moved on. After that, they started dying faster, in ways that made less and less sense. Trooper Vallis drowned in his sleep, his lungs filled with fluid that the medic said shouldn't have been there, that didn't match any disease or condition he'd ever seen. Private Hux tore out his own eyes with his fingers, clawing through the lids and sockets until he hit brain, screaming the whole time about how he couldn't stand to see it anymore, though he wouldn't say what it was. Corporal Tegan, the medic himself, went into convulsions during evening rations, his body seizing and twisting until his spine snapped in 3 places, and when we tried to help him, he bit through Private Gorvan's hand, severing 2 fingers, and Gorvan bled out before we could find the medical supplies we needed, because Tegan had been the one who knew where everything was stored. We burned them all, said the words, but the words were starting to sound hollow, starting to feel like noise we made because we didn't know what else to do. Lieutenant Harrow tried to maintain order. I'll give him that. Even as the deaths mounted, even as the remaining personnel started to fracture into paranoia and suspicion, he kept insisting on routine. Morning muster, equipment checks, observation rotations, meal schedules, as if following the forms would somehow protect us from whatever was happening. And maybe he was right. Maybe structure is all we have, the last defense against the dark, the final assertion that we're still soldiers, still servants of the Imperium, still bound by duty and doctrine, even when everything else has failed. Or maybe he was just scared, and routine was the only thing keeping him from joining Dren in that supply closet with a length of wire around his throat. He lasted longer than most. I'll give him that too. When Corporal Venn started insisting that the enemy had infiltrated the bunker, that one of us was a spy, an infiltrator wearing human skin, Harrow maintained calm. He ordered a full inspection, had us all strip down and examine each other for mutation or augmentation, finding nothing but the usual scars and tattoos and marks of service. When Private Mattis claimed he'd seen something moving in the ventilation ducts, something pale and segmented that watched him with too many eyes, Harrow sent me and Trooper Fask to investigate. We found nothing. Dust, rust, condensation. Harrow filed a report for psychological evaluation, recommended increased sedative rations, kept the machine functioning. But I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands shook when he thought nobody was watching, in the way he'd pause sometimes mid-sentence as if listening to something only he could hear. He was breaking. We all were. It was just a question of who'd go first. The smell started about 2 months in, though it might have been there earlier and I simply didn't notice. A sweetness, cloying and thick, like fruit left to rot in summer heat, mixed with something metallic, something that tasted like copper when you breathed through your mouth. It came from the ventilation system, Harrow said, probably just condensation mixing with rust and organic residue, nothing to worry about. But it got stronger, thicker, until you could feel it coating your throat with every breath, until it soaked into your clothes and your hair and your skin, until you tasted it in your rations and your water and your dreams. Private Osson vomited blood and died. Trooper Fask developed lesions across his chest and back, weeping sores that smelled like the ventilation system, like rot and copper, and when I tried to help him, he lunged at me with a knife, screaming that I was trying to spread it, trying to infect him, and I had to put him down with 3 shots to the chest from my last pistol, the beams punching through his ribcage and cauterizing the wounds even as he fell. I didn't burn him. I didn't say the words. I just dragged his body to the medical bay and left it there, because I was tired, so tired, and the forms were starting to seem pointless. That's when Lieutenant Harrow went into the lower levels. He'd been hearing sounds, he said, mechanical sounds, like something in the engineering section was still running, still functioning, and if he could get it working properly, maybe we could boost the Vox signal, maybe we could call for extraction, maybe we could get out of this Emperor, damned tomb before we all ended up like the others. He took a lamp pack, a Lazaraful, and Private Kessel, who'd volunteered because he was either braver or stupider than the rest of us. They went down the access stairs into the dark, and for a while I could hear their boots on metal, their voices echoing up through the shaft, and then I heard Harrow yelling something. Words I couldn't make out, and Kessel screaming, and the sounds of less fire, bright cracks that lit up the stairwell in stuttering flashes, and then silence. I called down. No response. I waited an hour, maybe 2, and called again. Nothing. I sealed the access door, welded it shut with a plasma torch from the equipment locker. If something came up those stairs, I didn't want to meet it. That left 5 of us, me, Corporal Venn, Private Mattis, Trooper Kane, and Private Ossen's brother, whose first name I never learned, who went by his family name exclusively, who stopped speaking after his brother died, and communicated only through nods and grunts and the occasional written note. We avoided each other, stayed in separate sections of the bunker. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Venn had taken to carrying his Lazaraful at all times, even to the latrine, convinced that one of us was the infiltrator his paranoia had invented. Mattis had barricaded himself in the supply room, piling crates and equipment against the door, refusing to come out except to grab rations and water. Kane had moved into the observation post, spending his hours staring through the scopes at the red wasteland outside, looking for enemy movement that never came, calling out coordinates to artillery batteries that would never fire. And Ossen's brother had gone to the incinerator room, where he sat among the ashes of all the dead we'd burned, writing in a journal with charcoal pages and pages of text that I never tried to read, because the look in his eyes told me I wouldn't like what I found there. I tried to maintain some semblance of routine. Morning checks of the generators, the water recyclers, the air filtration systems, all failing, all degrading, but still functional enough to keep one man alive if he rationed carefully. Inventory of supplies, 3 weeks of rations left, maybe 4 if I stretched them. Medical supplies nearly depleted, mostly bandages and antiseptic, the serious drugs long since used up. Ammunition, 2 power packs for my last pistol, 1 for my Lazaraful. Enough for a firefight, but not a siege. I logged it all in a data slate that hadn't synced with the command network in months, doing it because the act of recording felt important, felt like I was still part of something larger than myself, still contributing to the Imperium's vast machinery even if nobody would ever read these reports. Corporal Venn died next. I found him at the command console where he sits now, slumped forward, hands still gripping his Lazaraful, a neat hole in the side of his head, where he'd pressed the barrel against his temple and pulled the trigger. The wall behind him was scorched black, and the smell, that smell, was stronger near his body, so strong I gagged and had to step away. I didn't move him, didn't burn him, just left him there because moving a corpse felt like acknowledging that he was really dead, that this was really happening. And some part of me still wanted to believe that this was temporary, that tomorrow someone would arrive and restore order, and none of this would have happened the way I remember it. Private Mattis went next, though I didn't find all of him. I heard the screaming from the supply room, heard him shrieking about something coming through the walls, about fingers that weren't fingers, about mouths that smiled with teeth that went all the way back. And when I got there, the door was open and the room was painted red and the smell was overwhelming, and he was in pieces, scattered across the floor and walls and ceiling in configurations that didn't match human anatomy. And I stood there trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to make sense of the shapes, until I realized I was looking at him from the inside out, that something had turned him into an anatomical diagram, flesh and organs and bone displayed with the precision of a tech priest's dissection. And I backed away, sealed that door too, added it to the growing list of places I would never go again. Trooper Kane, I didn't see die, but I know. He's gone. I found his Lazaraful in the observation post, carefully placed on the floor, and his dog tags hanging from the periscope mount and his boots lined up against the wall, and everything else, uniform, equipment, the man himself, simply absent, vanished, as if he'd stepped out of his skin and walked away naked into some space I couldn't perceive. I took his power packs, added them to my supply. Practical thinking, survivor's thinking, the kind of thinking that makes you wonder what you've become when you can look at a man's last possessions and see only resources to be scavenged. Ossen's brother, I should have asked his name, should have learned it before it was too late, hung himself in the incinerator room using wire from the control panel, the same wire Sergeant Dren had used, as if the bunker itself was recycling its methods of death, finding efficiency in repetition. I found him swaying slightly, the wire cutting deep into his neck, his journal clutched in one hand, pages covered in text that, when I finally worked up the courage to read, turned out to be the same 3 words written over and over and over, ITIS hungry, thousands of repetitions filling every page, the letters getting larger and more erratic toward the end, until the final pages were just gouges in paper, the words carved deep enough to tear through multiple sheets. I burned the journal. Didn't burn him, couldn't face the incinerator again, couldn't stand the thought of reducing another person to ash and smoke, and the smell that never quite went away. So I left him hanging there, a monument to whatever had broken in his mind, and I sealed that door too. That was 3 days ago, or 3 weeks, time slips. Now it's just me. Just Trevin Koss. Last man walking, last man thinking. Last man who remembers that there were others here once, that this bunker was full of voices and movement and life, however grim that life might have been. I walk the corridors because staying still feels like death, feels like accepting that this is where I'll end, that this tomb will be my tomb too. I check the generators even though I barely understand how they work. I monitor the water recyclers even though the water tastes wrong, tastes like the smell from the vents, like copper and rot. I eat my rations even though they make me sick, even though I can feel them sitting heavy in my stomach like stones, like they're not quite digesting, not quite becoming part of me. I maintain the routine because Lieutenant Harrow was right about that much. Structure is all we have, the last defense against the dark. But the dark is winning, I can feel it. The generators are failing more frequently, the lights flickering and dimming, whole sections of the bunker going black for hours at a time. The air is getting thicker, harder to breathe, as if the recyclers are pumping something into the atmosphere, some gas or vapor that my lungs don't quite know how to process. And the sounds have gotten worse. They come from everywhere now, not just the ventilation shafts, but the walls themselves, the floors, the ceilings, a constant background susurration, like whispers in a language I almost understand. Sometimes I think I hear my name. Sometimes I think I hear the Emperor's prayer, that litany we were taught in training, but the words are wrong, inverted, twisted into shapes that hurt to hear. Sometimes I think I hear breathing, slow and deep and rhythmic, as if the bunker itself has developed lungs, as if I'm living inside something that's alive and dreaming, and I'm just a parasite crawling through its guts. I've started to see things, shapes in the shadows when the lights flicker, movement at the edges of my vision that disappears when I turn to look, faces in the walls, formed from rust and moisture, and my own desperate need to see something human, anything human, even if it's just a pattern my brain has imposed on random texture. I know they're not real. I know this is what happens when a mind is isolated too long, when it starts to fill the silence and the empty spaces with phantoms of its own creation. But knowing doesn't help. The shapes are still there, the faces still watch, and sometimes late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I feel breath on the back of my neck, warm and wet and wrong, and I spin around to find nothing, nobody, just the empty dark and the sound of my own heart hammering in my chest. I've been thinking about the others, about how they died, about the progression, the pattern, accident, suicide, starvation, and then the strange ones, the deaths that didn't make sense, that seemed designed rather than random, as if something was experimenting, learning, refining its methods. Drowning, self-mutilation, convulsions, dismemberment, disappearance, each one different, each one more elaborate, more horrific, more impossible. As if something was asking, what can a human body do? What can a human mind endure? How many ways can a person come apart? And we provided the answers, one corpse at a time, until only I remained. Why am I still alive? That's the question I keep coming back to. What makes me different? What makes me special? Nothing is the answer. Nothing at all. I'm not stronger or smarter or more faithful. I'm not lucky. Luck doesn't explain surviving this long when everyone else died. I'm not chosen. The Emperor doesn't choose people like me, doesn't even know people like me exist. So why? Why am I the last one walking these corridors, breathing this poisoned air, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist? And the answer that keeps surfacing, the answer I keep pushing down because I don't want to acknowledge, is this. Maybe I'm not surviving. Maybe I'm being saved. Saved for last. Saved for something special. The thought makes my skin crawl. I've been checking the sealed doors, the one to the lower levels where Lieutenant Harrow went, the one to the supply room where Private Mathis died, the one to the incinerator room where Ossen's brother hangs. I check them every day, running my hands over the welds, looking for signs of tampering, of breach, of something trying to get through, and every day the welds are intact, the doors are sealed, nothing has come through. But I can hear things on the other side. Sounds like movement, sounds like voices, sounds like all the dead I've left behind are moving around in those sealed rooms, going through the motions of living, performing their duties, maintaining their routines, waiting for me to let them out so they can resume their places in the Emperor's grand design. I don't open the doors. I'm not that far gone yet, but I think about it. In the long stretches when sleep won't come and the silence presses in and the walls seem to breathe around me, I think about it. About opening the doors. About walking down into the lower levels to find Lieutenant Harrow and Private Kessel, to see what they found down there, to understand what made them scream. About going into the supply room and piecing together the scattered remains of Private Mathis, reassembling him like a puzzle until I can ask him what he saw, what came through the walls with fingers that weren't fingers. About cutting down Ossen's brother and shaking him awake and demanding to know what he meant, what is hungry, what has been eating us one by one from the inside out. But I don't, because I know, on some level deeper than thought, that opening those doors would be the end. Not death. Death would be a mercy at this point, but something worse. Transformation, integration, becoming part of whatever this place has become, whatever has been growing in the dark and the silence, feeding on our fear and our isolation and our slow descent into madness. So I leave the doors sealed. I walk the corridors that remain open. I maintain the routine. I survive. For what? That's the other question I can't answer. For what purpose? Who benefits from my survival? The Imperium. They don't know I'm here. The bunker's Vox is dead, the signal lost, and even if it weren't, even if I could somehow repair it and call for extraction, what would I say? That everyone died? That something in the bunker killed them, or drove them to kill themselves, or made them vanish into spaces that shouldn't exist? That I'm the last one left and I don't know why? They'd chalk it up to madness, to isolation, to the same kind of breakdown that claimed Sergeant Dren and the others. They'd extract me if it was convenient, if they had resources to spare, if there was any tactical value in recovering a single guardsman from a worthless observation post on a worthless world. But convenience is rare in the Imperium, and resources are always stretched thin, and one man's life means nothing against the vast calculations of war. So no, I'm not surviving for the Imperium. They've already written me off, already reallocated my rations and my equipment slot to some fresh recruit who'll die in his first engagement and be forgotten before his corpse is cold. So who then? Who am I surviving for? Myself? That seems like pride. Like the kind of selfish thinking that gets you branded heretic and executed. But maybe that's all there is. Maybe survival is its own justification, its own purpose, the only meaning available in a universe that offers no others. I breathe because my lungs still work. I eat because my stomach still demands it. I walk because my legs still carry me. And when those things stop, when the body finally gives out or the mind finally breaks, then I'll stop too. And whatever comes after will come, and I'll have no say in it because the dead don't get to negotiate their fates. The generators failed completely yesterday, or maybe it was today. I was sleeping, I think, and I woke to absolute darkness. Darkness so complete it felt solid, felt like I could reach out and touch it, sculpt it, shape it into forms. I lay there for a long time, hours, minutes, seconds stretched, like taffy, listening to the silence, and the silence was wrong, was too thick, too present, too much like something living and aware. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, dim red strips that painted everything in shades of blood and shadow, and I got up and checked the generator room, and the main unit was dead, burned out. The smell of cooked wiring and melted insulation filling the air. The backup generator is running now, but it's small, meant for short-term emergencies, and it's eating through fuel at a rate that gives me maybe 3 days, maybe 4, before it dies too and the darkness becomes permanent. 3 days, 4 at most, and then what? I have a lamp pack, but the power cells are half depleted. I have a las pistol with 2 charge packs, enough light from the discharge to see by if I'm willing to waste ammunition on illumination. And then I have matches, a handful of them in a waterproof case I took from Trooper Kane's personal effects, and they'll burn for maybe 30 seconds each, long enough to see a face, to read a gauge, to light one last glow stick before the end. And after that, nothing. Just the dark, just the sounds. Just the feeling of breath on my neck and shapes moving at the edges of nothing, and the bunker breathing around me like a living thing that's finally ready to digest the parasite in its guts. I should be scared. I think I should be scared. But what I feel is closer to relief, a strange calm that's settled over me like a blanket, like the universe has finally decided to stop pretending that any of this mattered. The fear burned out somewhere back there, back with Corporal Venn and Private Mattis and all the others, and what's left is just acceptance. Quiet, empty, the kind of acceptance that comes when you've run out of options and energy and reasons to keep fighting. I'll die here, that's certain now, The only question is how, and honestly I'm curious. Will it be thirst, starvation, the air finally giving out? Or will it be something else, something from behind the sealed doors or inside the ventilation system or emerging from the walls themselves? Will I see it coming? Will I understand what it is? Will there be pain, or will it be quick, a mercy I don't deserve but receive anyway because even the universe gets tired of prolonging suffering? I've been writing this down. There's a data slate I've been using, logging everything, recording my observations and thoughts and the slow progression of events that led to this moment. Why? Force of habit, maybe. Or maybe some desperate hope that someone will find this, will read it, will know that we were here, that we served, that we died in the Emperor's name, even if he never knew our names or cared about our sacrifice. Or maybe I'm writing for myself, to prove that I still exist, that I'm still capable of thought and language and the basic human act of communication, even when there's nobody left to communicate with. The data slate is nearly full now, the memory bank's cluttered with my rambling confessions, and when it fills up completely I'll have to stop, and that thought bothers me more than it should, the idea that I'll lose my last way of asserting that I'm real, that this is happening, that I'm not just a ghost haunting an empty bunker in a forgotten corner of a war that nobody's winning. The smell has gotten worse. I know I've mentioned the smell before, but it needs mentioning again because it's everywhere now, so thick I can taste it with every breath, so pervasive it's soaked into my skin and my clothes and my thoughts. Sweet and metallic and wrong, like fruit and copper and rot all mixed together, and underneath it something else, something I can't identify, something that makes me think of altars and incense and the inside of churches I attended as a child, back before I knew what the Imperium really was, back when I still believed in mercy and justice and the idea that someone was watching over us. That smell, that church smell, but corrupted, inverted, turned into its own opposite, sacred made profane. The smell of faith rotting from within. I've started to wonder if the bunker was always like this, if the deaths and the madness and the sounds and the smell were here before we arrived, dormant, waiting for the right conditions to activate. Maybe the bunker itself is cursed or tainted or built on ground that should have been left alone. Maybe the red dust isn't just mineral deposits, but something else. Something that got into our lungs and our blood and our minds and grew there, turning us into vessels for something that has no name because naming it would give it too much power, would acknowledge it in ways the Imperium forbids. Maybe we were dead from the moment we set foot in this place, and everything since has just been our bodies catching up to the fact, acting out the final spasms of life before accepting the inevitable. Or maybe I'm losing my mind. That's the simpler explanation. That's what Occam's razor would suggest, if I remembered what Occam's razor is, if I had any mental tools left beyond the basic animal instinct to survive. Maybe there's nothing in the bunker except me and the corpses and my own disintegrating sanity, and all the sounds and smells and shapes are just hallucinations, projections, the mind's desperate attempt to populate the emptiness with something, anything, even if that something is horror. Maybe I killed them all. Maybe I'm Corporal Ven's infiltrator, the thing wearing human skin, and I don't remember doing it, because the human part of me couldn't accept what the thing part was doing. So it split off, compartmentalized, created a narrative where I'm the victim instead of the perpetrator. Maybe I'm sitting here writing my confession while surrounded by bodies I mutilated, people I murdered, and any minute now someone will come through that door and see me for what I really am. But nobody's coming through the door. That's the one thing I know for certain. Nobody's coming, no extraction, no rescue, no reinforcements. We've been forgotten, written off, erased from the Imperium's vast ledgers because our function is complete or irrelevant or never existed in the first place. The war goes on without us. The galaxy turns without us. The Emperor's light shines on 1 trillion worlds, and none of them are here. None of them are this red hell where men die alone in the dark and their deaths mean nothing beyond the paperwork required to file them away. We are the forgotten, the abandoned, the sacrificed without sacrifice, because sacrifice implies meaning, implies purpose, implies that someone values what was given up. We were just spent, used up, discarded. The anger comes in waves sometimes, crashes over me like cold water, and I want to scream, to rage, to curse the Emperor and the Imperium and the whole rotting machinery of empire that treats human lives like ammunition to be expended. But the anger never lasts. It's exhausting. Anger requires energy I don't have, requires caring about things that don't matter anymore. So it washes over me and recedes and leaves behind only the emptiness, the quiet acceptance, the knowledge that fighting is pointless when there's nothing to fight except your own irrelevance. I've been thinking about the sealed doors again, about what's behind them, about whether anything is behind them, or if I sealed away only empty rooms and corpses and my own fears given form. Part of me wants to know, needs to know. Before the end comes, before the darkness swallows everything, I want to understand what happened here, what killed us, whether it was something external or something we brought with ourselves, some seed of destruction we carried in our hearts and minds that found fertile ground in this place and grew until it consumed us. But opening those doors would be an admission that I've given up. That I'm no longer trying to survive, but only trying to understand, and understanding feels like a luxury I haven't earned, a grace I don't deserve, but I'm going to do it anyway. I can feel it. The pull is too strong, the need to know too intense to resist. 3 days, maybe 4, before the lights go out forever, and I'll spend them walking toward those doors, working up the courage, telling myself reasons why I should or shouldn't, knowing all along that I will because I have to, because the alternative is waiting here in this main corridor until I starve or suffocate or simply stop. And that ending feels wrong, feels incomplete, feels like a story without its final chapter. So I'll start with the nearest door, the one to the supply room where Private Mathis died, where his body still decorates the walls in patterns that hurt to remember. I'll break the seal, burn through the welds with the plasma torch, and I'll open it, and I'll look inside, and I'll see what's there. And maybe it'll kill me or maybe it won't, but at least I'll know, at least I'll have that. And then, if I survive, I'll move to the next door, and the next, working my way down to the lower levels where Lieutenant Harrow went and never came back from, descending into the dark like some ancient explorer in the stories we were told as children, stories about heroes who ventured into the underworld and emerged, transformed, reborn, enlightened. Except I won't emerge. There's nowhere to emerge to. The bunker is the underworld and I'm already in it, already dead by any measure that matters, and what I'm doing now is just walking toward the final confirmation of that fact. The generators are coughing again. The lights flickering, red emergency strips fading in and out, casting shadows that move wrong, that linger too long, that seem to have depth and substance and intent. I can hear something in the walls now, not whispers but something more concrete, something like scratching or scraping or the sound of something dragging itself through narrow spaces, and I know that it's probably just the pipes, just thermal expansion and contraction, just the building settling as it slowly falls apart. But it doesn't sound like pipes. It sounds purposeful. It sounds like something moving toward me. I'm going to finish this log entry, and then I'm going to pick up the plasma torch, and then I'm going to walk to that first sealed door, and I'm going to open it. because if something is coming for me, I'd rather meet it on my terms than wait for it to arrive on its own. That's what I tell myself. That's the story I'm constructing to justify what I'm about to do. But the truth, the real truth beneath all the rationalizations and justifications, is simpler. I'm lonely. I'm so desperately, crushingly lonely that even horror would be better than this emptiness, this solitude, this existence as the last man in a tomb. At least horror would be company. At least fear would be feeling. At least dying would be change. So that's what it's like. That's what it's like to be the last man in a bunker. It's not heroic. It's not meaningful. It's not even tragic in any grand sense. It's just sad, pathetic, a slow grinding down of everything that makes you human, hope, purpose, connection, meaning, until all that's left is the animal urge to keep breathing and the growing suspicion that breathing is the worst thing you could be doing, that death would be the kindest gift, that surrender would be wisdom rather than cowardice. The door to the supply room is 30 meters from where I'm sitting now. I can see it from here, can see the welds I put there weeks ago, shining dully in the red emergency light. 30 meters, that's all. That's the distance between me and understanding, between me and the truth, between me and whatever comes next. I should be more scared than I am. I should be reconsidering, backing away, finding some other solution, but there is no other solution. There's only forward or stopping, and stopping means waiting, and I'm done waiting. I'm done with everything except the walk toward that door and what lies beyond it. My hands are shaking. I notice this with a kind of detached curiosity, watching my fingers tremble as I set down the data slate, as I reach for the plasma torch, as I check the fuel cell and see that it's still got enough charge for one more job. The shaking isn't fear. I don't think it's fear. It might be exhaustion or malnutrition or the slow poisoning from breathing recycled air for too long. Or it might be excitement. The body's response to anticipation, to the knowledge that something is about to change, that the status quo is about to shatter, that the waiting is finally over. Yes, that's what it is, excitement. The kind a prisoner feels when the execution date finally arrives, when the uncertainty ends and certainty begins, when the question of when becomes the certainty of now. The torch ignites with a hiss, a blue-white flame that's too bright in the dim red light, and I have to squint against it as I stand, as I walk toward the door, as I press the flame against the first weld and watch the metal begin to glow, to soften, to run like water down the door's face. It's beautiful in its way, the transformation from solid to liquid, from structure to chaos, from barrier to opening. Everything returns to flux eventually. Everything melts. The first weld breaks, the second, the third. The door is coming loose, swinging slightly on its hinges, and the smell that emerges from the gap is overwhelming, is the church smell and the rot smell and the copper smell all magnified 1,000-fold. And I'm gagging, choking, but I keep working because stopping now would be worse than continuing. The fourth weld breaks, the fifth. The door swings open and darkness spills out, absolute darkness that the emergency lights don't penetrate. And from that darkness comes sound. Breathing, yes, but not one breath, not many breaths, but one massive inhalation and exhalation. As if the room itself has lungs, as if I'm looking into the mouth of something vast and alive and hungry. ITIS, hungry. That's what Ossen's brother wrote. That's what he tried to warn me about. And now I understand. Now I see. The bunker isn't a tomb, it's a throat. We've been living inside something that's been swallowing us one by one, digesting us slowly, savoring us. And I'm the last course, the final morsel, saved for this moment when the appetite is sharpest and the hunger most intense. The darkness moves toward me, through me, into me. And I realize with a clarity that's almost peaceful that I've been wrong about everything. I'm not the last man. I stopped being a man weeks ago, maybe months, maybe from the moment I entered this bunker. I'm just the last piece that hasn't realized it's already been eaten, the last cell that hasn't gotten the message that the body died long ago. And now the message is arriving, written in sensation and smell, and the feeling of walls that aren't walls breathing around me, and I'm reading it, understanding it, accepting it. I open my mouth to scream, but what comes out is singing, that wrong language singing I've been hearing from the pits, from the vents, from my own throat now, as something that isn't me uses my vocal cords to add one more voice to the chorus. And I realize, in the last moment before I stop being anything recognizable as Trevin Koss, that this is what happens to the forgotten. This is what the Imperium does to the ones it abandons. It leaves them in places like this, in bunkers and trenches and outposts at the galaxy's edge, and something finds them, something that lives in the gaps and feeds on isolation and loneliness and despair, and it eats them slowly, converts them, transforms them into extensions of itself. Not daemons, not Xenos. Something older, something that existed before the Imperium, before humanity, before thought itself, something that simply is, that has always been, that will always be, patient and endless and eternally, insatiably hungry. The data slate falls from my hand, clatters on the floor, the screen still glowing with my final words. Someone might find it someday, might read this confession, might understand what happened here, or might not, might just see the ravings of a madman, the breakdown of a weak mind unable to handle isolation. Either way, it doesn't matter. The bunker has what it wanted, the hunger is satisfied, and I am finally, mercifully, no longer alone. The singing continues, but I'm not singing anymore. I'm listening, we all are. All the voices that used to be people, all the dead that aren't quite dead, all of us joined in chorus, breathing in time with the bunker's massive lungs, waiting for the next group to arrive, the next garrison to be assigned to forward observation post Epsilon 77, waiting to welcome them, to feed them, to sing them our song until they join us and we grow stronger and the hunger grows with us and the cycle continues, endless, eternal, patient as stone and cold as the void between stars. This is what it's like. This is what it's like to be the last man in a bunker, and then afterward, this is what it's like to be the bunker itself.